this afternoon, and I'm so happy that we all could get together on what is called the Solar Day at COP28. May I just introduce you to TNC with a brief film? We can start with that, please.
The Nature Conservancy. With a presence in India since 2017, we are supporting the government's vision, development without discount, partnering India's journey of inclusive growth, enabling the country to achieve the climate commitment, empowering communities to help India achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. EFC India partners with a wide range of organizations to work on several challenging projects in the country. These include land restoration, regenerative agriculture, freshwater prioritization, smart urban cities, renewable energy, and climate change. Projects that touch communities and individual lives every day. To harness the power of regenerative agriculture, PNC India aims to reach out to 250,000 farmers across 18 districts of Punjab with Prana, promoting regenerative and no burn agriculture. Prana aims to eliminate crop residue burning in 1 million hectares of cropland, thereby promoting soil health, efficiency of water usage, and preventing loss of biodiversity. This scale up will help prevent at least 6 million tons of carbon dioxide from entering the atmosphere. A combination of rapid urbanization and climate change has degraded water bodies and wetlands in and around our cities. TNC India initiated the Sembakam Lake project to demonstrate how a large water body can be restored through a scientific process and nature based solutions. This has become India's largest nature based wastewater treatment system on a wetland. India is working towards providing electricity to every household and transitioning to green energy to achieve net zero emissions. Renewable energy projects need a huge footprint of land, and this creates socio ecological and environmental challenges. In response, we have developed the Site Right tool that helps identify areas with minimum socio ecological conflicts, thereby reducing project delays and cost overruns, thus supporting India to achieve its renewable energy goals. We are helping to transform how India tackles climate change, sustains agriculture, and builds resilient cities by collaborating with the central and state governments, institutions, NGOs, and the private sector. Our vision for India 2030 aims to benefit over 55 million people and would help conserve over 5 million hectares of land by the end of the decade.
Thank you, and welcome to all of you again to this afternoon of packed session of top speakers who can share with us more details on how we need to shape the future. Uh, Clearly, the TNC, which the Nature Conservancy is essentially to conserve the land and water that we all live on. So, land being the first one that we talk about, and then we talk about water. That's the Nature Conservancy's mission if you go onto the website. I would like to say that sustainable renewable energy is not just a feel good factor, but it is becoming more and more a business imperative for everyone as we move ahead. And with this, I think the discussion is so good with the International Solar Alliance, and what we are interested is a homegrown scientific tool from India that has the opportunity to shape up how we are going to be looking at land and the use on and the spread of renewable energy in a manner which is sustainable and helps protect both lands and waters of where we of the planet. So taking this in forward, I think we have a very important start, and I would request Dr. Ajay Mathur, the International Solar Alliance Director General, to join us here, who has been instrumental in getting us to COP28. Thank you. Yes. We- Today's discussion is on low impact siting for renewables, sustainable pathways for India, Latin America, and Sub Saharan Africa. We couldn't have had a better opportunity to have Luciana da Costa with us, who has a great she works and she is part of the development bank in Brazil, and we are certainly going to be hearing from you. Welcome, and please do join us on the stage. Dr. Joseph Daniel Onja, very clearly, Nigeria is a more important place in the sub-Saharan Africa. We are so delighted to have you with us here. And being a conservation scientist, it is a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to you. So I would start ladies first. And if you were to look at Luciana, that you are part of the largest development bank in Brazil, having done 25 years of experience in the kind of work that you have been undertaking, what would you consider looking at innovative financing mechanism accelerate this renewable energy growth across the country, world, and particularly in Brazil? What is the new tactics that you would want to take on, and could be some learnings for other countries as well? We know you have a great presentation. You can speak to everyone about the presentation. We'll share it with you, but we'd like you to share your thoughts here.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening to us today. It's a great pleasure to be here with my colleagues, with Hannah. So, PND Brazil, I mean, we have great opportunities and challenges with the energy transition, and Brazil is somehow different from the rest of the world in terms of the big challenges going forward. Brazil is the fifth largest greenhouse gas emitter. We shoot 2.4 gigatons of CO2 gross and 1.7 net, but 75% of our greenhouse gas emission comes from deforestation and land use. 50% comes from deforestation, 24% from land use, and just 17% of energy. Because Brazil has our power matrix is 88% renewable, and our energy matrix is 47% renewable, compared to 14% of the average of OECD. And in our energy, in our power matrix, 60% is hydro and 25% wind. And currently we have 194% of gigawatts of installed capacity in Brazil, and we are going to double that by 2030, 2035. Brazil has one of the cheapest renewable energy. So the average of the levelized cost of energy in the world should be $50 per megawatts. In Brazil is 30, 25, between 25 and 30. So we have renewable energy and we have very cheap renewable energy. And on top of that, Brazil has 180,000 kilometers of transmission lines. And in 4 years, we'll have 270,000 kilometers of transmission line. What that means is that we have cheap renewable energy and it's firm. We deliver renewable energy anywhere in the country 24 hours a day because the hydro acts as a battery and our grid is great. That's why Bloomberg NAF is telling that Brazil will have the cheapest green hydrogen by 2030. BNDES, what BNDES has to do with that, and what the instruments that we have BNDES have to do with that. BNDES is a 71-year-old development bank, one of the largest in Latin America, the largest in the Americas maybe, and one of the largest in the world. In the past 20 years, we have started with incentives for solar and wind in the first mandate of President Lula. So President Lula has launched a program which is called Program of Incentive for Other Sources of Energy, basically wind and solar. And in the past 20 years, BNDES has financed in infrastructure and energy more than $200 billion of projects. And what what else has BNDES done? BNDES has promoted the whole supply chain. We have provided incentives for more than 3,000 suppliers in the wind industry. So we are able to build the industry with the incentive of BNDES. BNDES has financed more than 75% of the installed capacity of wind energy in Brazil. So, uh, we, what we have, what the government has also done, a very stable regulatory framework in the power industry. Currently, the private sector can finance transmissions lines in Brazil because it's because the regulatory framework for transmissions line is well established and has been tested. So what we do believe is that it's a combination of financing, stable regulatory framework, development banks incentivizing and subsidizing in the beginning, but then the private sector comes, and then private capital markets and commercial banks, they are able to incentivize. In Brazil, we have our problem now is that the price of energy is so low that that projects are not pumping up. But we think that it's not structural, it's just for certain time. So the market is expecting the price of energy to grow, of renewable energy to grow. But can you imagine a country facing a problem of low renewable price?
Right.
That's Brazil, because we have access of renewable energy in the country.
Thank you. And really, Luciana, thank you so much for this. And as you said, Bandis, and that is the Brazilian Development Bank, very clearly you have been part of the infrastructure energy transition. On your left, you've got the energy transition czar for India who's sitting there. But wanted to mention here that in terms of climate change, and you are the managing director of the development bank, about some of the actions that you've taken, but I would like to get her to know that if this scientific tool that comes to Brazil, uh, to be ensuring that land parcels that you're using for solar is in a way does not impact any other work on the economy like agriculture or any of these. So have you looked at that, and a quick answer to that before I.
So yeah, when the BNDES in the beginning, we were like developing the projects, but those solar projects and wind projects, usually our analysis, we have an analysis on how it's going to be the impact on the land and the population. So we have, besides financial tools, we have a we pursue an environmental and social responsibility analysis on each project, because of course we know that the turbines sometimes they cause a lot of sound, a lot of noise for the population. We know that it could have some impact on biodiversity. So we do care on the analysis. Besides the financial analysis, we do the ESR analysis. And and on the solar and wind, usually uh, we have to import equipment in the beginning. So we have a program to incentivize the players to produce turbines in Brazil. But it's a soft program. We do not block imports in the beginning because we know that it's needed certain time to develop 3,000 suppliers to build the whole supply chain of the wind turbines. We have not been successful in nationalizing the production of solar panels. What we have done for the wind, we were not able to do for solar. Solar is heavily imported still in Brazil.
Right.
What is good in Brazil that the CO2 content in the industrial projects in the industrial products in Brazil is very low. So if we produce, let's say, an iPhone in Brazil, the CO2 content will be the lowest compared to anywhere in the world because we have a very our energy. Yeah. Our steel is greener, our cement is greener, our aluminum is greener. So the CO2 content in our products in Brazil is very low because we have this.
That's very heartening to hear. A round of applause for you. Uh, Moving to Dr. George, mm, Joseph, Dr. Joseph, I just wanted to quickly get your thoughts on, you've gone in for 20% emission reduction. What would be the energy mix as you go forward? And based on what are some of the accelerating work financially that has gone ahead in Brazil, what is Nigeria looking at this juncture?
All right. Thank you very much for having me on this panel. And before I proceed, I have to give a background in this context about Nigeria. Nigeria is a population of about 220 million. And out of this 220 million, we have about um, those who are exposed, I mean, those who don't have energy, about 40% of that population. Talking about 87 million or so people who don't have these energy. And so far, historically, we used to have hydro as our renewable energy, a source of renewable energy. Recently, we introduced gas a few years ago to power some of our plants, and then the gas came into the mix as our transition energy. So far in Nigeria, just 2%, only 2% is we have solar in our system. So you can see that Nigeria has the potential of the energy renewable energy is very high. But in that potential, as a conservation biologist, also gives me concern because when we want to expand some of those energies, where are they going to be situated? Where's the infrastructure going to be? Yeah, so that is why something like this of the right sites too is very important to come and see where are those places that these infrastructures will be installed
Right.
that will have less impact on biodiversity, will have less impact on the agricultural sector, will have less impact on, on even on the humans as well, because it's very important for us to see on top of my head, we may say, oh, okay, let's go towards the desert where the land is less encumbered. But if you talk about that, then you're talking about somewhere about 1,000 kilometers away from the farthest part in the coastal area. So you talk about infrastructure that will conduct the power from that region to those other regions. And these infrastructures will also impact humans, will also impact agricultural land, will also impact biodiversity. And that is why, as a country and as we also collaborate with others, even outside of Nigeria, to see how energy infrastructure is impacting biodiversity, especially when we talk about soaring birds or migratory birds and other biodiversity as well. Looking at that, we'll be able to see what can be done ahead of time to ensure that these infrastructures, even as we want to go into renewables, because we have the tendency, I mean, we want to expand into renewables, and we want to go as far as Brazil, 80% of renewables. But what will be the impact? And having that foresight will be able to help us looking at the end from the beginning so that we put things in place since we have the potential of growth. So it's very important for us to look at it in that context so that we'll be able to grow in line with the biodiversity on one hand, the social economic factors on the other side, so that as we are exposed to um, uh, the financial assistance that may be coming, will also have less impact on other sector and other, especially the biodiversity component, talking from a conservation point of view.
Right. Thank you so much. You spoke exactly our language when we're talking about the biodiversity. And when we say, and we always use in TNC, the Nature Conservancy, that the most critical challenge that we have is climate change. One critical challenge that we have is climate change and biodiversity. So the question says is one challenge, it's climate and biodiversity because it is the both sides of the same coin. So biodiversity is something that we rely on, and the satellite tool, as very rightly said, as we have reached out, the satellite tool has reached out to 9 states in India, and we are ready to move ahead. And Dr. Mathur, when we spoke last, it was very nice for you to look at these two regions that we were looking at, how the SiteRight tool could look at the land use patterns that we have as we move ahead. One of the key things in the earlier sessions that was there in this Solar Hub was also talking about how countries like in Africa, many of the countries have the potential, but they do not have the energy to use all of it. So the one sun, one world, one grid, which we have talked about, maybe it would be very nice for you to talk about it and how the SiteRight tool would also support that activity. If we were to see large go-to areas in some countries and no-go areas in some countries, how do we work this through? And your keynote, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annapurna. Uh, thank you. Thanks to both of you for excellent overviews on both the energy challenges as well as the renewable energy challenges. Annapurna, you spoke of climate and biodiversity in the same sentence. This is important because a question which I often ask, and I ask this seriously, when has a tiger done any good to you recently? The reason I ask the question is because a tiger is at the top of the food chain, and therefore things that impact everything are captured by that. We are, we will, what I don't want us to get into is destroying the habitat of tiger and all the food chain below it. At the same time, when you're talking of the food chain is as much of you and I as humans as it is of the other species that we want to. We don't want it to become a fight for fuel for our use and fuel as food. We found the SiteRight tool to be amazingly useful. One of my colleagues has blogged on it to say that one of the key challenges is figuring out what are the kinds of places which are, to use your words, no go. But what one of the principal suggestions that we also had was, could we also say, therefore, what are the kinds of remediation that is needed? So some could be completely no go, there could be others where remediation could help. The reason I say this is because as we go ahead, I'm looking at Brazil and Nigeria, very, very clearly, the kind of grassland destruction that occurs in Amazonia cannot be sustained. So the way I look at it is solar in Amazonia is out of question, though it has a huge amount of land. Okay, Brazil has a electricity growth at about 3% a year. Where will that come from? We have been flirting with thermal power. Look at all of this together. Does it make sense to have it on the reservoirs behind the dams? Because the reservoir surface is available for floating solar. And I'm told that these are things that are already in the works. That's great. Similarly, in Nigeria, we are looking at the export of oil, but also providing energy to all. Solar mini grids make great sense. You have a huge program for solar mini grids. It also implies that the total footprint of solar is smaller at any one place. So you don't interfere too much with the biodiversity. I think it would be useful for each one of us to figure out what is acceptable. In other words, it would be very useful if a discussion of the pros and cons of locating solar panels at particular places. I mean, whether solar panels or wind, it doesn't matter. Wind? Did I say wind? No, I don't know what wind is. Okay. I only know solar. But the challenge is that we need to look at this, at these land intensive opportunities. For example, it would help us greatly to look at agricultural areas. Now, in all agricultural areas, especially in the tropics, we routinely cross what is known as the light saturation point. In other words, the amount of light and therefore heat reaching the plants is far more than the need for growth. If that is the case, then what are the best ways of, what plants do is that they absorb a lot of the heat, they take the heat, and there's a lot of transpiration, and then they need more water. Can we manage it? I would very much like to see uh, an atlas of what are the kinds of crops that can be grown under photovoltaics in different agroclimatic zones. As I understood it till a few days ago, most cereals, rice, wheat, etc., would not fit the bill. But a few days ago, somebody told me, no, no, you can even grow an adequate amount of paddy, rice, under photovoltaics. Now, I didn't know this, but I stand corrected. Similarly, if we are talking in terms of uh, 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 of uh, uh, solar mini grids that we spoke about, most villages have common areas. Would those common areas be large enough? Can we make solar mini grids as a collection of solar mini grids? In other words, have various common areas which are connected to each other and to the grid. These are the kinds of issues that we need to address. We were actually delighted because for the first time we found tools that identified areas where we could go to. This is very important. Uh, Last month or the month before that, there was a auction and the bids were opened. It was carried out by the Indian Railways Energy Management Company. They asked for round the clock firm renewable energy electricity. And they got it from multiple vendors as a mix of solar and wind and storage. And prices were 80% of the price new coal power stations were being given. So the price was between 399 and 421 rupees per kilowatt hour. The price of coal was 5 plus. So the challenge, therefore, was where do we site them? Land was an issue. The second issue was that the capital cost of the solar plus wind plus storage is twice the cost of a fossil fuel plant, say a coal power plant. Where do we get the money? And the third issue was transmission lines. Because if all of these three are in the same place, you could have one transmission line. But if the three are in different places, then you have three transmission lines operating at 33% capacity utilization factor. These substantially change the economics. It'll be great if these kinds of issues, this is what we are interrogating the site right tool for. And as we move ahead, I would like us to be able to provide this tool to users across the world on places where we could go. And I hope that development banks such as yours could make an initial, that when somebody applies to you for financing for a solar or a wind energy project, they show that at least on site, right, it's okay. It could be one of the screening requirements that you'll obviously do much more due diligence. But this could be one of the screening requirements that could be done. Let me end here. And Annapurna, many, many thanks.
No, Dr. Mathur, thank you so much for your words. But let me, Dr. Joseph, so good to have had you here with us for the session. And it is so good that we could have the possibility. You took your time to be with us. Thank you so much. And we will definitely be in touch with you as far as the SiteRide tool is concerned. We need a photo picture. We need a family photo as well. We'll do that. So, and Luciana, thank you so much. I know you have to rush for another event, and you know we are going to be concluding very quickly. But thank you so much for being here. Dr. Mathur, what you presented just now is going to be the next session that's going to happen where we have Srini. Thank you very much for being here. And we are going to be conducting the next Saturday session where we have practitioners who are going to be here with us
Oh,
after this in the next session. And the panel discussion is going to be taking into some of those elements that you had talked about and perhaps how the site right tool could be worked out. With this, may I thank?
okay.
Yes, you can go
Thank you
ahead.
very much. I'll leave you here. I was just talking to doctor, is that this screening in the installation of solar plants and wind plants in the beginning, 25 years ago, the biodiversity analysis, the impact on was very low. And we have learned a lot. For instance, we learned that the turbines can even kill birds because of noise. So we have now improved the screening process that we have. It has been 25 years of learning curve, but that's key for the analysis of those type of projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And may I request the next panel to come up? Srini? Can I have my the one that one there? Yeah. Shiva and
Thank you.
I'm going to thank you. Thanks very much. So, you will be in touch. How did you decide that? Okay.
Yes. Now he's
these states. And our science shows that there is more than enough degraded land to build on, such as retired coal mines. Working with public and private partners, we're demonstrating how to convert mined out lands into solar power sites and retrain former miners in new green jobs. Join us to build a climate smart future where all communities and nature thrive.
Well, thank you very much. But I want to get a little deeper onto the SiteRide tool and who else but Dr. Shiv Prakash Nagaraju, who is our scientist in TNC India, but also leading the renewable energy work to share how the SiteRide tool works. Quick run through on the SiteRide tool. Then after that, I would invite Srini. You would come in, and I think Shiva would, as soon as he finishes, invites the other panel. So we're going to be having the panel sitting there so that the presentation can be made by Shiva, and then we move ahead with panelists coming and sitting up here. So Shiva, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Annapurna. I think as Annapurna mentioned, I just first would like to set a context about low impact siting, then how site rate can help you to site renewable energy in a socially and environmentally responsible way. So we use this, science-based approach called renewable energy by design, where we have used this principle to build this tool called site rate in India. I think as many of you are aware of, especially the renewable energy projects like utility scale solar and wind, they are land intensive, right? Especially when you talk about industrial scale build out of renewable energy, right? So because they need a lot of land, so we need to make sure that, so when you are planning this renewable energy infrastructure, so it is built in such a way that it considers social and environmental factors during the siting. So I think that's where this site rate tool will come and help you to kind of choose these larger land parcels where you have a minimal social and environmental conflict. So it's not only consider the social and environmental conflict, but it also consider the resource potential, like solar and wind potential. Then it help you to, site the projects. We started this work here in India. Now we have expanded this tool to 9 states where we have more than 80% of the renewable energy potential. And we also see that this renewable energy development is happening very rapidly in these states. I think using that case study of India, so like our purpose here that how you actually can scale up the site rate approach to other countries where you have similar problem. Right, ultimately we know that the renewable energy is important to avoid the climate change, but in the meantime we also need to make sure that when we are building these renewable energy infrastructures, it is socially and environmentally responsible. So if you take case of India, so we have a very ambitious target of achieving 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. And it, at least as per our estimates, you need nearly 20 to 40,000 square kilometers of land to develop this project. Because we did some of the land footprint analysis right now, if you look into the pattern of the renewables, like they are mostly sited on agriculture and some of the natural land. But our idea is to kind of drive this development away from natural and productive land and make sure that land conflicts will not limit the renewable energy transition. So just to give you, because even if you take case of India, we are not just going to stop the renewable energy development by 2030 achieving the 500 gigawatt target, because we also have a target of 2070 net zero. And if you need to achieve 2070 net zero, you need to build or ramp up 10 to 15 times more what we have committed for 2030. Right, that means that as per some of the estimate, we need more than 5,000 to 7,000 gigawatt of renewable build out in India to achieve net zero. And if you take in consideration of that, you may need nearly 3 to 5% of India's land mass. Considering that these projects are land intensive, And we are also see that because the renewable projects are land intensive, now land is becoming one of the important limiting factors in India to kind of transition into renewable energy, because in a way, Nature Conservancy kind of, in partnership with C-Step, Vasudha Foundation, and Foundation for Ecological Security, building this tool, we want to help the government that like how to mitigate this land conflicts and help the government to achieve its target. So that's the whole idea. Because here you can see that we also have built another tool called Global Renewable Watch. Basically, what Global Renewable Watch will do is the idea. Again, I think we started this Global Renewable Watch work also in India. The basic objective of the tool is to monitor renewable energy development. It not only kind of helps you to monitor how different countries are progressing towards renewable energy development, but it also helps you to monitor on what kind of landscape this renewable energy is being built on, right? Because for example, as I mentioned to you, so you can see that in case of the India, you see that large majority of these projects are being sited on the agricultural land and some of them on the natural ecosystem. I think we also have done similar land footprint analysis for Nigeria and Brazil too, and you see that there is a lot of similarity when you look into this land use pattern of renewables. So I think, as I mentioned to you, because it's important that this renewable energy infrastructure is going to be socially and environmentally responsible. I think that's where the renewable energy will play a major role. So basically, our idea is if any developers wants to go and develop mega scale project, if he needs to bring in any investment for such project, so the investors will ask you how certain that you are going to develop that project, right? The certainty of developing any industrial scale renewable energy projects like solar, wind depends on availability of land for that particular infrastructure, right? And if you don't have a land to build the renewables, then the investment will not come in because of the land conflicts. In a way, that also kind of many times what happens is when you come across this land conflict, that also delays the project, right? Renewable energy projects, that way that also kind of incur a lot of cost for the developers and also for the investors. So ultimately, like if you consider these factors like social and environmental factors when you are building the renewable energy projects proactively, that can actually help you to mitigate these land conflicts, that can also kind of help developers to save the cost, right? Imagine like if the project is stalled for 3 to 4 years, and how much of the cost that they are going to incur for that. In a way, so our idea is not only kind of make sure that this build out is responsible. In a way, it's also going to kind of help developers and investors to save on the cost, right? I think that's where it's important, because our approach kind of integrates multiple stakeholders, in citing principles, like it helps policymakers, developers, and investors, to kind of build out this project in a faster manner, but in a social and environmentally responsible manner. So just to give a glimpse that how SiteRight works, because this is a special tool. So it's, you can say that it's a land use decision support tool for renewables. What it looks into, it considers social factors and environmental factors, like so important biodiversity areas, protected areas. Then it also looks for critically endangered species habitats when it comes to environmental factors. It also looks into technical capacity of solar and wind in those places. And when it comes to social factors, it looks for indigenous people, how much of the indigenous land is that in particular place. Considering all these factors, it will tell you which are the areas where you have less likely to encounter these social and environmental conflicts, and go and develop this project. In a way, you can say that it's kind of a spatial prioritization tool that helps you to kind of make a decision considering all these different factors. So as I mentioned to you, because you have this different layer, then you can do this environmental and social sensitivity analysis. Then you decide where the project has to be built out. This is the different layers here in India we have used. And what is so interesting about the SiteRate tool, I know that there are different global tools available, like IBAT, Integrated Biodiversity Tool, that kind of uses more of an global data, right? But I think our tool is using the local data, right? So because in case of the global data, you may miss a lot of information, because that's what is very important about this tool, because the data is sourced locally, collaborating with government and many other environmental organization, and the organization works for the community. And it's also kind of lot of research we have done in the last 5 to 6 years. A lot of stakeholder consultation, and based on that, we have built this tool. So considering these social and environmental factors, so in case of India, the Citrate tool, what we have developed, it has three different modules within the Citrate tool. These three different modules are awareness module, then you have an assessment module, then you have a planning module. So awareness model will kind of give you an idea, right? Because if you have a 2030 target, so it will give you an idea that in case of the awareness, if you go with the business and as usual scenario, just having a singular vision of achieving your renewable energy target. So what's the kind of impact you are going to create on natural, and what kind of natural environmental and social impact you have. But if you consider both social and environmental factors, which are all the likely areas you can go and build, I think in a way it gives you an awareness about this low impact siting. So that's what the main purpose of awareness tool. Then you have an assessment tool. In case of the assessment tool, if you are a developer, you have chosen a land parcel, then you want to screen that land parcel, do some preliminary screening and see that whether there are likely any environmental and social factors. You can use that shape file, upload it to the tool, then you can screen. Then that will kind of give you likely social and environmental factor. Then based on that, the developers can take a decision whether he needs to go the further deeper social and environmental impact analysis before he goes and develop the project. So in case of the planning tool, what we have done, especially in these different states where we have developed the tool, so this will also give you an estimated district level in the state. Imagine that, like, if you are an investor or developers want to develop something like 100 megawatt multiple projects in particular location, you just go and enter that particular capacity, then it will kind of give you 10 different places where it has less likely to encounter social and environmental factors, and where you can go and build out. And that planning module will consider not only the resource potential, environmental and social, but it also considers transmission infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, and many other important infrastructures and factors which is important for developing the renewable energy projects. So that's about, because I want to finish it soon. I think this is the state of Rajasthan, where you can see that there are a lot of different layers integrated here, starting from agriculture land. Agriculture lands are categorized into single crop, double crop, fallow land. Then I think if you want to kind of integrate some of the species range maps, then you can also kind of integrate into the tool and see that where you have a lot of resource potential like solar and wind, whether you also kind of likely to that kind of resource potential areas are also kind of likely overlap with this important habitat area, then you can take a decision. So then in the second figure you can see that there are green and different colors there. So that's called as a development index, because where I spoke that you can consider transmission, it has considered a lot of transmission infrastructure, then we have built probability model. So considering all those factors, it will tell you which are all the high development potential areas where you can go and develop renewables. And it's a very user friendly tool, and we have made accessible, right? Otherwise, if you go and want to use IBAT like global tools and all, it will charge you like $2,000 something for the subscription. But we have made it open access. Ultimately, being a non-governmental organization, our idea is to make sure that this build out is going to be social India, environmental responsible, and we would like to see that this approach is being scaled in other countries. I conclude here. Then I would like to invite Srinivas Krishnamurthy, CEO Vasudha Foundation, uh, to come here and so facilitate the panel discussion and introduce the panel members. So thank you, everyone.
Very good afternoon to all of you. Very good afternoon to all of you. My name is Srinivas, and I'm
the CEO of an organization called Vasudha Foundation. At the outset, I would like to thank the Nature Conservancy and Annapurna particularly for inviting me uh, to moderate this very important panel, which is on the identifying land parcels to ensure that both social and environmental values are factored in, while at the same time not compromising on the renewable energy target. I have a very eminent panelist with me, and I would like to invite them one by one. I have Habib from who's the director from ATRI, which is a renowned environment and conservation organization based out of India. I have Dr. Amino Kano, who is the Director of Policy, Government Relations, the Conservancy Africa. I have Bruce McKinney, Global Director, Renewable Energy, the Nature Conservancy. Before I sort of start off this panel and pose questions to the panelists, I would like to sort of give a very brief background on why this tool is of great importance. And to set the context, I'll sort of talk about the Indian scenario, set the context of my Indian scenario. Now, if you look at India's total greenhouse gas emissions, which is roughly about 2953 million tons as on date, a good 80% of that is from the energy sector alone. And out of that, if you actually look at the major contributors to our greenhouse gas emissions, it is the electricity generation, which contributes close to about 37% of our total emissions. Right now, as of now, we have close to about 425 gigawatts of installed capacity, while we have made rapid inroads on renewable energy, which is close to about 175 gigawatts. By end of 2030, we are expected to touch close to about 800 gigawatts. And by 2040, 2050, it's expected to touch about 2,000 plus, maybe even 3,000 gigawatts. Now, with India's announcement of joining the net zero club of countries that have announced the net zero by 2070, one of the key areas where emissions will have to be reduced or brought down virtually to zero would be your electricity generation or emissions from the electricity generation. If not now, at least in the next 20, 30 years. And then the next sector would be the transport. So now, if you are looking at bringing your electricity or emissions from your electricity generation to close to zero, let's say by 2050 or 2060, in order to meet your 2070 net zero targets, then it means that you need to have a rapid scale up of renewable energy. Now, with that as a context, uh, one of the most promising, both in terms of cost, especially if you look at the way the costs have declined, is solar. I remember when we started off in 2010, it was something like 18 rupees a kilowatt hour, and it's now sub 2 rupees. Right? That's been a very, very steep fall in the price of electricity generation from solar. So obviously, there's a lot of focus on solar that we're allowed to look at. But again, if you look at the land, well, the cost and in terms of economics, solar does make a lot of sense. But if you look at the land footprint, you look at close to about 4 or 5 acres of land or hectares of land per megawatt of solar installation, which means that you are looking at huge land requirements if you had to meet, say, 2,000 or 3,000 gigawatts of solar by, let's say, the next 20, 30, 40 years. That's where I think there is a it is very, very important that you have tools like the SiteRight tool. And we, particularly, Vasudha Foundation, is particularly very happy and proud to be associated as part of the consortium that's sort of pushing and ensuring that there's a public buy-in for the use of SiteRight tool, particularly by policymakers across all states. So, with this background, uh, let's sort of open this up, and I would like to start off with my good friend Abhi, who is the director of ATRI. And particularly, Abhi, I know that you and I have had a lot of conversations, particularly on the scrubland or what you call as open ecosystems, which is otherwise called a grassland. In India, these grasslands are generally considered as wasteland, and that's where a lot of solar comes, whereas solar installations are do happen, and that's where you have, especially if you're looking at large solar parks, the first sort of a area that's targeted to set up solar parks are these scrublands or grasslands. Now, but then, while I do understand that from you that those also have huge sequestration potential. Uh, but if you are looking at, let's say, 2,000 gigawatts of solar by XYZ years, whether it's 2030 or 2040 or 2050, whatever it might be, how do you think what should be the or how should India sort of address achieving its emission reduction from electricity generation, which means scaling up renewable and solar plants, while at the same time not compromising on the ecological and social values of land?
Thanks so much, Srini. So, this is of course a central question, one of prioritization. How do we prioritize one land use over another? And that's old as human civilization itself. We've always been prioritizing where we do what. Um, so now, when it comes to renewable energy, I think one of the mistakes that we are making is we are treating renewable energy in the same way that we treated conventional energy, is that we are treating it as a point source of power. You know, we built, well, we have to make a coal mine where there is coal. And then you transport it to a power plant. That power plant might not be near a coal mine. It might be near where the power is being consumed. So then those transportation costs are involved. We're viewing renewables in the same manner when in fact renewables do have that advantage that they can be distributed. They can be set, they can be sited where you're utilizing your power. Obviously not everywhere, but country like India, um, the western side, the peninsular India, it is good for solar and wind in most places. Um, so I think one of the challenges we really need to look at is we're really looking at the supply side of it when we talk about land use. Um, and we're trying to look for where to situate solar and wind, which has, as Shiv said, low conflict. But in fact, we should be looking at where is the demand coming from, and then map out areas around it that make more economic sense. Because as the previous speaker was saying, you don't have to worry about transmission costs. You're not, so you have to factor those get factored in. Currently, Rajasthan wants to be a solar powerhouse in India, and who is it going to evacuate its power to? Uh, it's going to be everything's outside the state. But if you look at so, for example, there are about 270 special economic zones in India. Okay, spread again across the states of um, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Andhra Pradesh. We every state has its industrial development corporations. I'll give you the example of Maharashtra alone. Maharashtra has about 2.5 lakh acres uh, in its land bank for its MIDCs. This is where the power is going to be consumed. They have huge land available, which is already earmarked for development. You're not going to be, there's no biodiversity conservation potential in those areas. There's no livelihood. All of those have already been factored in. So, to begin with, I would suggest those are actually the low conflict areas. And in fact, not just low conflict, we should call them high potential areas for locating renewables. And that's something that the site right tool should actively incorporate. Strongly suggest that. The other thing that we can do is, the open natural ecosystems that are currently part of the site right as are given as a reporting layer, not as an exclusionary one. But what we can do is further segregate those based on size, the open natural ecosystem areas, and say, okay, areas greater than 10 square kilometers in size, which have high habitat integrity, should not be prioritized for renewables. So that's where you can then start looking at areas that you that have higher potential for biodiversity conservation and probably lower conflict with livelihoods and biodiversity. Lastly, again, something that Ajay Mathur had mentioned is agricultural land should not be deprioritized for renewables because um, most agricultural lands in semi-arid landscapes in India are on the margins. They're barely producing anything. Most of the farmers who are farming there are in deep debt and are subject to the vagaries of the monsoon and so on. And with a changing climate, their yields are going to plummet. So if you can give them a more stable income using solar, and then they can cultivate, using for agrivoltaics, which he spoke about, its extra income. So I think excluding agri areas may not be the best way forward. So that's one potential. Thanks.
Thank you, Abhi. Since we're sort of started off with India, just another quick question to you. Um, Now, what you sort of said is that we should look at a combination of distributed renewables and maybe large solar parks where it makes sense, where the land is available. And you also suggested that we look at agro-photo PV, which is now gaining fair amount of popularity, particularly in certain pockets. I think Maharashtra has got a few very good pilots and so on. But then there's also a lack of awareness in some of these, particularly the agro-photovoltaic. It's still there's still a lot of lack of awareness amongst people. So, what is the kind of approach you think that one should take? And so you need to get multiple stakeholders here. So, what is the kind of approach that you suggest that um, you know we sort of involve, particularly in popularizing the SiteRide tool, and more than using the tool, ensuring that those social values and environmental values are deeply embedded in the developer's mind or people who set up these solar generation companies. What's kind of approach that you would suggest?
I think the first thing is they should renewable companies in India currently get a free pass because there's no environmental and social impact assessment required for setting this up. This is not true for other parts of the world. If you had to do something in the US or in Europe, you would require a whole host of environmental and social impact assessments. In India, you don't need to do that. So that needs to be brought back. You can do it for scale. So, for example, you know, something that's at the village level can be exempt, but something that's at utility scale should certainly go through that process. And if you started going through that process, I think those will start um, taking care of some of the problems that you mentioned. Then people will start looking for alternatives. Right now, there's no need for it. In fact, there is a green grab going on in the name of, because land is then easily available in many places. So, uh, doing the tough negotiations with individual, for example, in Karnataka, you have a great example. The largest solar power park is Pavagada, which is done on farmland, where the land was leased from the farmers. So the farmers get regular income from this in drought-prone area where they were at best marginal farmers. They were not getting too high yield from those lands. So there are some wins, double, triple wins as well, uh, possible with renewables. And I think we need to really work hard to identify those. We're at the moment looking for the easy wins here, but we're forgetting that there might be win lose lose also in there. We're sort of ignoring the lose lose side of it, and I think we should not do that. We need to come back to it, and that's why those hard negotiations might be required so that renewables doesn't get a free pass.
Thank you. I would now like to turn to you, Dr. Amino. We've been reading in the papers, and I've also been following that Nigeria has there are a lot of mini grids that's suddenly coming up. The World Bank, I read recently, funded something like 1,000 mini grids in Nigeria. I know that the AC for All is very very active, and so there's a lot of mini grids that's coming up, and a lot of solar mini grids that's coming up. But one also reads that there are a lot of solar generation that's also coming up in the large scale solar parks. Um, from some statistics that we from some work that we read, I do know that in 2012 you had something like about 20 gigawatt hours of solar generation, and that's now grown up to 50 plus gigawatt hours. So Nigeria is a good example of where you have both mini grids as well as large farms that sort of coexist. But then, what are the challenges, opportunities do you see for these mini grids to continue to coexist with these large solar parks, or do you think the large solar parks would become like in a country like India become the order of the day that people would prefer them over mini grids?
Thank you for that question. Yes, it's good that we have a mix of both the large solar parks and the mini grids, but it's really necessity that has pushed Nigeria that way. So, as Dr. Onoja was saying in the opening, we have 40% of the citizens of Nigeria who have power poverty because they don't have any electricity. And the current generation rate from mostly from conventional sources is about 8,000 megawatts per day. Uh, and only about 4,000 gets to the people and is used. And the reason is because of transmission. So the more large ones you do, the more distance you have to cover and the more grid you have to expand. And that's expensive, both financially, but also for the land use, for biodiversity, and for other things. And it speaks to what Abby was saying, because that is not them putting the power where the highest demand is. That means putting it somewhere and then ferrying it to other places. So I see the small mini grids really increasing more in number than the large grids. A, because they are really they don't have these transmission costs and they need to do all these grids. So in the end, cost per unit is less. And secondly, they are really where the power is needed.
Um, Another question I had was going beyond solar. Is do you think it is? Um, are there areas, particularly if you're looking at bordering the Equatorial Guinea and that areas? Do you think has there been some study done on offshore wind potential there? Is that something that you think Nigeria would be considering with the other countries in the neighborhood?
There are preliminary scoping studies, but this is not something in the immediate term or in the immediate in the radar for now. The main thing on the radar are uh, the current mix, which is largely now hydro, but then ramping up the solar. So we have an ambition that between this year and 2025, we are going to solarize 5 million households, which means getting electricity to 25 million people. And that has been the North Star for the government. There are some challenges to that because there need to be changes to some policy because as we are talking here now, at the same time that government is trying to expand the solar potential and to try to actualize that, they are also shouting about only 10% of Nigeria's arable land is used, and they need that same piece of land for food and for crops for export. And I think there is a lot more pressure about using that land more for food than for electricity. So there is that. But also, I think the potential of Nigeria goes beyond what government does and what large or even mini grids do. Because right now we have epileptic power supply with lots of load shedding and power thing. So solar has escaped from the hands of government. A lot of people in urban and in rural areas are taking it on themselves to have small units in their own households, whether it's an inverter with one battery and one or two solar panels on their thing. And that is growing rapidly because of the reduction in cost of solar.
Uh, Sorry, I just one more follow-up question. Nigeria has also a lot of industries, and so right, and you do have some, and then um, but you also have oil. So where do you see the solar competing with that the other industry, the oil industry there?
So I think the main component of oil that is significant in the power sector is gas, because Nigeria, even though we make a name as being an oil producing country, but really we are sitting on more gas than oil. And over the last 15, 20 years, there has been deliberate government policy and investment in independent power plants, which are mostly run by gas. But there are huge challenges in terms of the investment costs to bring this to, and then the transmission, as I mentioned as well. So because the generation has been privatized, the distribution has been privatized, but the transmission has not. So there is a lot of problems. And because of that heavy upfront investment needed to power gas plants and take it to where the demand is, solar is really taking over now, even in government cycles. And I see solar growing much faster than gas uh, going into the future.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Bruce, I'll now turn to you, sort of bringing the very global perspective. Starting from the G20, we've been talking of tripling of RE, and then now a couple of days back, there was this agreement that with 117, 118, whatever countries signing the tripling of RE. Now, if you're looking at tripling of RE by 2030, you're looking at a massive target. I don't have, I can't remember the number, but I'm sure you do. Uh, that would require huge amount of land. So globally, what are the kind of, if you can sort of give the sense to us, is globally, what are the kind of policies that exist that sort of ensures that we could triple, RE globally, while at the same time not compromising on social and environmental values?
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, the Nature Conservancy's been proud to support the goal to triple renewables, working with the Global Renewables Alliance. And yesterday we had an event committing to ensure that that tripling of renewables happens in a nature positive and just transition way. I think for us, when we talk about the scale of land that's going to be needed, um, the target for tripling is 11,000 gigawatts. India's target is 500 gigawatts, and you saw how much land that Shiva indicated India needs, and then just multiply that in your head. Or another way to think about it is we need 3 gigawatts every day of new renewable energy around the planet. That's a lot, and it's going to take some land. We've been talking a lot about land and low impact places and the scale of land, but when I think about the Site Right tool, I think about a solution for the social license challenge. The biggest challenge we're seeing and the growing challenge for renewables as we move out of the easy places to the harder places is social conflict where people just don't want it, or they wonder, what is this going to do for me, or what is this going to do to me? And am I going to lose access to resources and lands that I currently can access in a common way? Um, Depending on your country, there's going to be something going on the social cultural side with this transition. So we need to be proactive with tools like SiteRight now to identify pathways that are going to be least conflict, low impact. And I think that's really, for me, it can get technical sometimes, and sometimes we focus on the tool, and there are going to be more tools out there. But this is really, in the end, about people and people's acceptance of renewables and support for it. And if we don't have that, we won't make it. We're in both a sprint and a marathon. And I guess in India's case, an ultra marathon because you're going to 2070. But 2030 is a sprint, 2050 is a marathon, 2070 is an ultra marathon. If we don't have the public and social support for renewables, we won't achieve our climate goals. So, uh, really excited about SiteRight and the partnerships that we have in India around us, the tool, and both the outreach and adoption of the tool, uh, both in India and we hope in other countries as well.
Thank you, Bruce. Just another general question on regulation aspects. Uh, in most parts of the world, you don't have what is called as the environmental impacts assessment required for renewable energy projects, but you require it for the fossil fuel. But as the quantum of power plants in the solar category increases, and so does wind, do you think at some point in time one would have to relook at having some sort of a regulation on environmental and social impacts kind of an assessment? Is there some country that's already contemplating it? Is there something that you think would make sense, or do you think uh, you know just having voluntary mechanism or tools like this would sort of help address the issue?
Well, I do think we have to think a little differently, given the scale that we need and the climate challenge. And going project by project is generally not the fastest way. So I do think we have to think about solutions like what's been done in a number of countries now. Europe has just mandated that all 27 member countries do renewable acceleration areas. And these are predefined areas where the environmental impacts are likely to be lower and the permitting is expected to go in half the time. So those are projects, they'll still have to do an environmental analysis around the project, but it's a lighter touch because you're going into a zone that's been kind of pre-approved for this type of development. So those kinds of proactive measures, I think, can speed things up. I work at the Nature Conservancy. I'm never going to say you don't need an environmental and social impact assessment, but we should be finding ways to go fast and expedite that kind of permitting wherever we can.
Yeah. Uh, can I just, we have about 5 minutes, right? I mean, it's a hard 4:30 hard stop. So I would like to just open the floor. Any questions or any thoughts from people here? I know we do have people like we have Nidhi here. With HCL Foundation has done a lot of work on biodiversity. So is there any thoughts people would like to share? Very brief thoughts. 1 minute, half a second. Sure.
All right, does that work? Uh, for citing renewables in Indian lands, it looked like most of that is planned for agricultural land. And I wondered if that was because agricultural land takes up the greatest proportion of available land, or is it just the easiest access? Or, how many sort of decommissioned lands or brownfields, like, does it have to go on agricultural, or is it just that, it's greatest proportion?
Yeah. So some parts of agricultural land have been used, but the greatest planned expansion is not in agricultural land. It's in what we've called open natural ecosystems, which have, because of historical reasons, colonial legacies, really been classified as wastelands. So Indians don't recognize savannas as a natural ecosystem in India. Uh, so that's a problem, and we're trying to change that. Um, Desert regions again are classified as wasteland. So then people assume, oh, there's nothing here. Let's just go and put up solar. So that's the challenge, and that's the largest category of land that solar is being planned for across peninsular India. So yeah, that's just to answer your question. But yeah, but we're trying to present that instead of making it on green field or brown field, we should instead do it in gray areas that have already been built up, or areas that have been tilled over already and are low productivity. Yeah.
Uh, you are very right when you said that for 500 gigawatt to achieve, we need a lot of lands, and eventually it may not have been the agricultural land so far. But if you have to actually plan, maybe some part of that, or maybe more than the some part of the land will go into that. But don't you think that one solution is to promote aggressively the rooftop solar?
Precisely.
That is an area which has not been covered as yet, and we have been doing other things, but not
I was
this.
wondering why people didn't talk of that.
I think a related comment, especially from CSR point of view, because as donors, and it's more of a donor dilemma because we're working on afforestation. Also, we've been associated with several they're working on ground, and on the other side we have access to electricity. I mean, we ourselves did like almost, I remember year one, some 50 crores of solar, and that's when we learned that from major to mini grids, and especially the essential services, for example healthcare services, for example schools, that's where we went on the rooftop model, and that really worked quite well. There is absolutely no ecological assessment, so as to say it's mostly agriculture land, and that's where a lot of CSR fund also end up going. But when we started to do afforestation ourselves, that's when we kind of understood that we also need to weigh where our funding is going. So I think this entire policy discourse on mini versus major, whether we should be having anything allowed on land which is precisely the agricultural fertile land, or it is something where we are doing biodiversity damage. This really needs to touch the ground. I mean, in India itself, 35,000 crores of CSR funding is available. And there is a big vacuum when it comes to knowledge sharing there, and lot of damage is happening as we talk about it. So I think these tools are interesting. What we really need to do is how do we really bring this entire balance of people, while I know that a lot of policy discourse is happening at a government level. So just an observation as well as a concern. Yeah.
Stick.
Maybe I should give this to Bruce or to Shiva to talk about it. And Avi, what you touched upon is looking at other areas which could be mined out lands that we are looking at. Currently, TNC India is looking at that, and that could probably change the scenario as far as renewable energy is concerned. But maybe Shiva or Bruce can say a
Just
little.
say
Yes. Maybe you would understand if there is one solution that you would recommend to your finance, start to your what
okay. What I'd recommend is that to the points that we just heard, that they think about a hierarchy here. That the best thing we can do is energy efficiency to reduce demand where we can. And then you don't need the new energy in the first place. Next, we should be thinking about rooftop. We should be thinking about former mine lands, brownfields, places that we can make productive again, bring jobs to communities that are going to need them in this transition. And then next, get into the utility scale that you're seeing here, where it's cited well. The thing is, in most models around that we've done, you can't achieve these kinds of big goals for the world on climate without uh, doing a lot of utility scale. So we can put solar on every rooftop. We're still going to need a lot of these big projects. So we're focused on that. But I think you are very right that we should be starting by talking about let's maximize all these opportunities where we are sharing solar with areas that are already developed.
I mean, quickly.
Yeah, I think Bruce has already made most of the important points here. I just think that uh, probably land prioritization, spatial prioritization, kind of like what SiteRight is doing, uh, with perhaps some more stakeholders, some more analysis that better informs what you can site where, is really required. Thanks.
Thanks, Avi. Dr. Anand.
Yeah, I think just before my recommendation, just wanted to say the Nigeria example would be good for regulations, I think, because there is no relaxing of EIA requirement for the renewables in Nigeria. It's just up to a size of whatever project, then mandatory EIA is required. And you have seen how we have ramped up our solar energy, even with that regime going on. So now to your question about what would I recommend to my minister? I think the first thing is I was so fascinated with the Brazilian example and having a development bank that champions this and provide ready, accessible, and maybe less risky, less interest level financing for renewable. We don't have that in Nigeria. That would be good. Two would be more and more and more deregulation and deregulation, really, because again, our electricity industry is still so heavily centralized. So devolution, so that subnationals would be able to do things, and even the private sector would have a much freer space to operate. I think those two will really help in taking off of the renewable industry.
Thank you very much. We have already overshot our time by 4 minutes. Before Annapurna accuses me of not moderating well, I would like to bring the session to a close. I would like to thank all the panelists for their insights, rich insights, and valuable perspectives. With that, I would like to bring the session to a close. Over to you, Annapurna, to take it forward. Over to you too.
I, on behalf of the Nature Conservancy India, would like to extend my gratitude to all the speakers, participants, and the International Solar Alliance for making this event a resounding success. Thank you all for being a part of this global gathering and fostering connections that transcend borders. Thank you so much. I would like to request for a photograph, please. Ma'am, Shiva.